Okay.
Well, good afternoon. I'm John Levy, and it's my honor to serve as the 10th chair of the board of the Legal Services Corporation. And on behalf of our board, I welcome you to LSC's very special fifth annual Veterans Day program. This year, again, we are virtual, but next year, we very much hope to be in person again. Today's event focuses on the outstanding work being done across the country to support veterans living in rural areas. It will also highlight ongoing progress in implementing the recommendations of LSC's Veterans Task Force report, which was released just last year. We're privileged to hear recorded remarks from Virginia Congressman Bobby Scott, who served in the National Guard and the U.S. Army Reserve, LSC President Ron Flagg, LSC board member and Veterans Task Force co-chair John Malcolm, and task force member and Holland and Hart associate Nicholas Hassenfuss will also speak. In addition, legal, medical, and social service experts from around the country will explore initiatives that serve and support veterans in rural communities during a panel discussion moderated by LSC's General Counsel and former General Counsel for the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, Will Gunn. Our nation's veterans have unfortunately long faced civil legal challenges, and for nearly 50 years, the Legal Services Corporation and its 132 grantees in every state have tried their best to help veterans struggling with these needs, including eviction, foreclosure, unemployment, wrongful denial of benefits. And LSC's most recent Justice Gap report, released just a few months ago, showed that 76% of low-income veteran households experienced at least one civil legal problem in the past year. 44% experienced 5 or more problems, and a whopping 27% reported experiencing 10 or more problems. Last year, LSC funded organizations provided legal help to 36,000 veteran households, and still low-income veterans reported that they had not received any or enough legal help for 84% of their legal issues. The most common civil legal problems they experienced related to consumer issues, healthcare, income maintenance. Well, over the years, LSC and its grantees have tried their best to support veterans in a number of other ways, including launching stateside-legal.org, that's the poster right behind me, the first national website focusing on helping veterans and military families, establishing medical legal partnerships with veterans health centers, operating legal hotlines for veterans, sponsoring and participating in stand-down events and Military Mondays, receiving regular referrals from veterans group and other outreach and advocacy programs. Well, LSC's Veterans Task Force report was intended to raise awareness of the civil legal needs of veterans, promote partnerships among legal aid providers and other organizations that serve veterans, highlight successful vet model programs, and provide strategies to increase pro bono legal services for vets. A co-chair of that task force will update us today on the implementation of its far-reaching recommendations. Well, as former Defense Secretary General James Mattis observed last year at a field hearing of the Veterans Task Force, we owe a special debt of gratitude to our veterans for the commitment they have made by entering military service. Members of the armed services, and I quote them, are sworn to support and defend the Constitution, creating our republic, swearing to do so at their personal peril, signing a blank check to all the American people, payable with their lives. It is to our veterans and their families that we owe the freedom that rides so lightly on us, unquote. In his Veterans Day proclamation last week, President Biden noted that this responsibility to our veterans is unique among our national obligations, and I quote the president. As both a father and commander-in-chief, I firmly believe that our one truly sacred obligation as a nation is to properly prepare and equip the brave women and men we send into harm's way, and to care for them and their loved ones when they return home, unquote. Well, there's no higher duty to honor this sacred obligation, and LSC and its grantees remain committed to making it central to our mission that they receive equal justice under law. Thank you so very much. It is now my distinct privilege to introduce a longtime supporter of our nation's veterans, Virginia Congressman Bobby Scott. While his schedule did not allow him to be live with us today, he has shared a special message of support that we'll be showing, or we tried to show just now, but we will in a minute. Congressman Scott is a dedicated advocate for our nation's veterans and military families. He was the sponsor for the post 9/11 GI Bill, which has been cited as the largest expansion of veterans' education benefits since World War II. Throughout law school, as I indicated, he served in the National Guard and the U.S. Army Reserve. As a new attorney, Congressman Scott founded the Peninsula Legal Aid Center to ensure that low-income citizens had access to representation. He served in the Virginia House of Delegates and the Virginia Senate until his election to Congress in 1993. Our sincere thanks to Congressman Scott for sharing his remarks with us today and for his very strong support of LSC throughout the years. Thank you very much, and Congressman Scott.
Hi, this is Congressman Bobby Scott, and it's my pleasure to join you virtually for the Legal Services Corporation's Veterans Day event. As the founding attorney for the Peninsula Legal Aid Center in Virginia, I know that the Legal Services Corporation and your legal aid grantees across the country do very important work, especially for veterans. 76% of veteran households encountered at least one civil legal problem during the past year, and 44% encountered at least 5 in the past year. This event is a great resource for veterans and their advocates to learn about the resources and legal aid that may be available to them. I'm honored to represent the Hampton Roads area of Virginia, home to hundreds of thousands of veterans and active service members. Veterans everywhere face barriers, and veterans in more rural areas face some unique hurdles, including a lack of broadband access to be able to interface with the legal aid program. Long travel distances to VA facilities, which often have a legal aid attorney stationed there, and long distances to courthouses are consistent problems that veterans encounter when assessing needed services. Connecting rural communities with broadband is one of many reasons why I supported President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, which invests in expanding broadband to rural areas and helps reconnect communities. But now more must be done. We've made tremendous strides in improving how our nation helps veterans transition from military service back to civilian life, and ensuring our veterans have access to civil legal aid is one of those areas. Far too many veterans face obstacles, including homelessness and substance use disorder. Legal aid plays a significant role in ensuring that veterans are able to get back on their feet through veterans courts, drug treatment courts, and medical legal partnerships. And I'll continue to advocate for robust LSC funding in Congress. So thank you to LSC for hosting today's event and for all of the veterans in attendance. I hope you'll find the program today helpful and that you find resources that can be helpful to yourself and to other veterans. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Scott, for your insightful remarks and, more importantly, your service on the Hill and to our country as a member of the National Guard and U.S. Army Reserve. I'm Ron Flagg, president of LSC, and today it is also my honor to serve on the board of directors of the National Veterans Legal Services Program, a board on which I've served for over 30 years, including 15 years as board chair. As my colleague John Levy shared at the top of the program, civil legal problems, be they threatened evictions to other than honorable discharges from the military, are often the greatest obstacle to a veteran's health, housing, stability, and productivity. LSC has long prioritized raising awareness of these legal issues that veterans face. Our Veterans Task Force is the cornerstone of this awareness raising. LSC, of course, also funds legal aid programs across the country that provide direct services, often with pro bono volunteers, to assist veterans and their families, ensuring that they can obtain the benefits and assistance they are entitled to and so richly deserve. Concurrently, LSC has been engaged in conversations about the barriers that low-income Americans residing in rural communities, be they in Alaska, Alabama, Maine, Montana, wherever they are, those barriers that they must overcome to access services and resolve their legal problems. And last year, we made the decision to focus more intentionally on these barriers and solutions to those barriers by convening another task force, the Rural Justice Task Force. The Rural Justice Task Force includes about 60 members from 28 states. About half of our task force are legal aid providers, access to justice advocates, and attorneys in private practice and the organized bar. The other half of the task force represent a broad range of sectors, including education, consumer retail and other businesses, healthcare, the judiciary, and rural development experts. From these diverse backgrounds, our Rural Justice Task Force members come together to help LSC do three things. One, raise awareness about the rural justice gap. Two, profile model legal services programs and partnerships that increase access to justice in rural communities. And three, identify best practices for supporting rural attorneys and serving rural clients. As these two important bodies of work, the Rural Justice Task Force and the Veterans Task Force, advanced, it became clear that there were many and are many overlapping topics between them and opportunities to share best practices and key lessons learned. Rural states carry the highest percentage of past military service. Alaska, Montana, Virginia, Wyoming, and Maine have the highest percentage of veterans serving per population. You'll be hearing from a Mainer later in the program. When America's service members return home, analysis by the U.S. Department of Agriculture reveals that the poverty rate for veterans actually tends to be a few percentage points lower than for non-veteran adults. That's a good thing. But even though veterans are less likely to experience poverty than the general population, about 1.5 million veterans still live below the federal poverty level, preventing them from affording the cost of legal representation among other essential services, not to mention housing and healthcare and other critical services. And in some areas of the nation, especially in rural areas and small towns, veterans actually have a higher poverty rate than non-veterans. So today, with synergy between our two task forces as our aim, We've designed this program to explore what the legal aid community and partners can do to best serve veterans most effectively in rural areas. The Rural Justice Task Force has been engaged in peer learning discussions and fact-finding, and we will share their deliberations and recommendations in a report to be published next summer. The group's initial conversations have explored rural demographics and some of the unique barriers in our rural neighborhoods and areas across the country. Things like the digital divide, the long travel distance and a lack of public transportation, limited affordable housing and other infrastructure, a dearth of human services, health and childcare providers, and often a predominant culture of self-reliance, which makes it harder for service providers, including legal aid providers, to establish trust as well as contact. All of this can make rural living feel isolating and hard and put justice out of reach. Now consider the multiplier effect of people living in rural areas if the person who's living in that rural areas has experienced something like combat or other traumas during service that have made you different from other people in your community. Or if you returned home from active duty with an injury that resulted in mobility challenges, or you now require specialized care to manage behavioral health challenges or substance use disorder following military trauma. These challenges may sound overwhelming and insurmountable, but we know and we've seen solutions exist in rural communities designed and led by rural people in those communities. We're fortunate to have some of these people serving on our task forces and speaking today as part of our program. All of us at LSC are listening attentively, and we will use our vantage point as a national funder to amplify what we hear for the good of the field. Before we hear from our panel about effective programs that bring legal aid and other assistance to our veterans and other vulnerable populations, we'd like to tell you more about what LSC has learned about veterans' most critical civil legal needs and our response. I'd like to invite LSC board member John Malcolm, who co-chaired the Veterans Task Force, to provide this background. John has a sizable day job. He oversees the Heritage Foundation's work to increase the understanding of our Constitution and the rule of law as vice president of the Institute for Constitutional Government and director of the Heritage Foundation's Edwin Meese III Center for Legal and Judicial Studies. John, thanks for your service to LSC and for being with us today. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Ron. I very much appreciate it. It really was a privilege to serve as the co-chair of the Veterans Task Force. So it's my pleasure to speak to you today about the work of that Veterans Task Force and our progress in implementing the task force's recommendations. So the 43-member task force carried out its work between 2020 and 2021 during the pandemic. We met regularly over the course of that year to identify veterans' most critical civil legal needs, examine existing resources that are available to veterans, and to develop recommendations for increasing veterans' access to legal assistance. The task force consulted with experts from the Veterans Administration, the judiciary, healthcare, and organizations working with minority veteran populations. The task force produced a report with 13 substantive recommendations for legal aid providers, for LSC, state and local governments, and Congress to increase veterans' access to comprehensive services, including civil legal aid. The overarching theme of many of these recommendations was the importance of collaboration among organizations, including legal aid organizations that serve veterans. As our chair, John Levy, likes to say, the Legal Services Corporation doesn't write task force reports just to have them sit on shelves gathering dust. So in that spirit, I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about the work that LSC and its partners have been doing to bring the task force's recommendations to life. But first, let me say how grateful we are that several task force members and our partner in this effort, DLA Piper, chose to remain involved in LSC's work to implement the report's recommendations. Working together, we spent the past year collaborating on several initiatives to raise awareness of civil legal issues faced by veterans and bring community partners, law firms, the VA, and of course, LSC's grantees together to address those issues in a holistic fashion. I want to highlight just 3 of these initiatives. First, LSC was approached by the Bob Woodruff Foundation to help educate their grantees and community partners about the legal issues faced by veterans. Last December, our General Counsel, Will Gunn, led an excellent panel discussion informing foundation partners about LSC's grantee network and strategies for engaging not only them, but also pro bono attorneys to provide legal assistance to veterans that they work with. And earlier this year, the Woodruff Foundation published an issue of its Stand Smart white paper discussing the civil legal needs of veterans and highlighting our task force's recommendations to build partnerships between civil legal aid providers and community organizations serving veterans. We're, of course, extremely grateful to the Woodruff Foundation for everything it has done to raise awareness about veterans' legal issues. Second, LSC has continued its efforts with the VA to promote the development of strong partnerships between the VA and LSC's grantees. LSC coordinated the involvement of legal aid providers into 5 virtual Veterans Experience Action Centers, which were conducted by the VA's Veteran Experience Office. These were 3-day virtual events focused on select cities at which VA personnel and community partners were available to meet with pre-registered veterans to help with VA benefits issues, including employment training, public benefits, and any other issues that the veterans had. The Veterans Experience Office identified legal assistance as a gap in their service networks and reached out to us to connect them with providers at events in Kentucky, Southern California, Michigan, Montana, and Maine. The Legal Services Corporation also connected the Suicide Prevention Office within the VA with our longstanding partner, the Online Community Library Center, and the library community in general to educate librarians about recognizing veterans at risk for suicide and being able to connect them with the needed resources. Together, LSC, OCLC, and the VA created a veterans resource page for librarians and organized a webinar presented by the VA focused on reducing suicide risk factors among veterans. Finally, and perhaps most exciting, LSC and implementation team members coordinated a Veterans Legal Aid clinic pilot event in Florida with the Mission United Broward County and Nova Southeastern University. This event brought together pro bono attorneys, legal aid attorneys, and veteran services officers to provide advice or to take cases for representations when appropriate. This pilot model incorporates the warm handoff concept as a central component. In other words, if a veteran registers and cannot attend or cannot get all the assistance he or she needs at the pilot clinic, a clinic partner will directly connect that veteran with an attorney or organization to provide the needed assistance. The team is organizing a second pilot event for early 2023 and is looking forward to sharing its model and lessons learned with the legal aid and veterans communities. So I hope after this, you will agree that we have not let the task force's report gather dust, and that we have demonstrated that we will continue to demonstrate that through the efforts of some very dedicated individuals, we will make sure that the work of this task force and all our task forces results in real, tangible improvements in the ability of LSC's client populations to access the legal services they need. And now it's my privilege to turn the floor over to our General Counsel, Will Gunn, to moderate a fantastic panel. Will, who is himself an Air Force veteran, became General Counsel in June of 2021. He's the former General Counsel of the VA and a board member of the National Veterans Legal Services Program. Will, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, John. I greatly appreciate it. And welcome everyone to our program on meeting the legal needs of rural veterans. I'm joined today by a distinguished panel of practitioners and experts who are well-versed in the different aspects of the challenges that rural veterans, particularly low-income rural veterans, face when they have legal problems. First, if you haven't been paying close attention, you might be wondering why we chose to address this topic. The answer for me is revealed best by examining the results of the Department of Veterans Affairs Challenge Survey. Since 1994, the VA has been using the Challenge Survey to assess the unmet needs of homeless veterans and those veterans who are at risk of being homeless. In looking at the top 10 unmet needs of this population, one finds that legal needs dominate the list, with at least 7 of the top 10 being civil legal needs. The needs include legal assistance with landlord-tenant issues, legal help with family law issues to include child custody issues and child support issues, legal help with credit issues, and legal help with consumer affairs issues, and even legal help with restoring a driver's license. What's especially troublesome is that, as you've already heard, America has over 1.6 veterans living in poverty, and 76% of low-income veteran households experienced at least one legal problem last year. That problem is exacerbated by the fact that the vast majority of those veterans in those households receive little or no help at all for the civil legal problems that they face. In fact, LSC's Justice Gap survey puts that figure at 84%. 84% of all of those veterans receive little or no help for their civil legal needs. While these problems impact low-income veterans regardless of their location, the problems are particularly acute for rural veterans. That's because 2 dimensions of access to justice involve affordability and availability. When it comes to veterans living in rural areas, regardless of the veteran's ability to afford legal services, they often have difficulty finding a lawyer that's close to them. As the American Bar Association's 2020 profile of the legal profession says, large swaths of the United States have few lawyers or no lawyers at all. Now, I realize that for some people that may not seem like a big deal, but it is. It's life impacted. There are more than 3,100 counties and county equivalents in the United States, and 54 of them, 54 counties or county equivalents, have no lawyers whatsoever. Another 182 only have 1 or 2 lawyers. Some of these are parts of so-called legal deserts. These are large areas where residents have to travel far to find a lawyer for routine matters, such as drafting a will or handling a divorce or disputing a traffic violation. Because of these problems of availability and affordability, low-income Americans living in rural areas didn't receive enough legal help for 94% of their civil legal problems. So 84% of veterans low-income veterans receive no help for their problems, and 94% of Americans living in rural areas, of low-income Americans living in rural areas, receive no help for their problems. So if you overlay these circles, you find that we have serious problems that we confront. Today, we're fortunate to be joined by panelists who are interested in solving the access to justice issues faced by low-income veterans living in rural areas. To put it plainly, we're interested today in not only identifying the problems encountered by rural veterans, but also we want to identify some of the strategies for effectively connecting rural veterans with lawyers. Our panelists today include Dr. Peter J. Ciboli. He's the acting executive director in the Office of Rural Health with the United States Department of Veterans Affairs. Also, we're joined by Carrie Miller Lose. Mental Health Specialty Programs Director for VA's Nebraska, Western Iowa Healthcare System. We're also joined by Nicole Golden Bouchard, the Managing Attorney for the Veterans Unit and for StatesideLegal.org for Pine Tree Legal Assistance in the state of Maine. And our final panelist is Jane Wagner. Jane is Interim Managing Attorney for the Health, Education, and Law Project, also known as the HELP Project for Legal Aid of Nebraska. I want to thank all of you for participating today. And I have questions for all of you, but I'd like to get started with you, Dr. Kaboly. First, your expertise being in rural health, when it comes to caring for veterans, could you briefly describe what rural health means and what it looks like?
You bet. Thank you so much. And thanks for letting me be here today. I'm Peter Kaboly. I'm at the Iowa City VA Medical Center. I'm a hospitalist physician here, and as Will said, the acting executive director for the Office of Rural Health. I'm going to talk briefly about sort of the big picture issues for rural veterans. And this applies to all people who live in rural areas, but I'm going to talk specifically about what are the impacts for veterans who live in rural areas. The biggest overall issue is just access to care. So getting the right care at the right time in the right location. And the biggest barrier to that access is distance. Okay, so we have distance that we need to overcome. And to get care, we can overcome distance by either transporting people in some way or providing telemedicine. And the pandemic has certainly taught us a lot about what we can do. And the VA has always been a pioneer in telemedicine, but we did even more during the last couple of years. So when you talk about access, it depends on the services that you need. There are some services that those of us that live in rural areas, we know we don't have. And that's okay, because we know we have to drive, or we have to call, or we have to use video, we have to do something to get those services. You're not having a neurosurgeon or in every small community, and that's fine. But there are a lot of routine things that veterans can't access. And if they're in a small community and they don't have access to basic things like primary care or blood draws, it's certainly a lot more of a burden. So how do we overcome that distance? One other thing about rural veterans, and some other people touched on this, is in terms of specific barriers, they are a little poorer in general than their urban counterparts. They have a few more chronic illnesses, so they tend to be a little sicker. They tend to have higher rates of tobacco use and obesity. But overall, rural people are pretty similar to urban people. We're all pretty much alike. It's just the unique barriers that we might have.
So, Dr. Kaboly, you started to allude to this contrast between rural veterans and veterans living in urban areas, and you pointed out that for the most part they're alike. But you did point out some interesting differences. Any insight in terms of those differences?
Yeah. So sometimes what happens is rural populations get lumped together as a monolith. And those of us, and anybody who's lived anywhere in the country knows there are regional differences in how people do things, and specifically in how they access healthcare. And so the challenges that might face the rural Southeast could be very different than the challenges that face the Intermountain West. And they may have different solutions to overcome them. So I think, thinking about rural as being, very heterogeneous, I think is important. And the other one is about broadband, and people mentioned that already. And fortunately, there's a lot of effort that's going into improve that. But we know, looking at veterans, about 2% of urban dwelling veterans don't have adequate access to broadband at speeds that allow for video, like we're doing right now. And that's about 20% in rural veterans. So it's about, the tenfold difference. And that really impacts when you're trying to get care through video. So broadband is one thing that we can do to overcome it. The other is transportation. VA is one of the only healthcare systems in the world that has an extensive transportation system, both that we provide and in partnership with veteran service organizations like the American Legion and the VFW and Disabled American Veterans. So our population really depends on the transportation service.
Thanks, Doctor. Carrie, as I understand it, many of the veterans in your service area live in rural areas. Building on what Dr. Kaboly just told us, what are some of the challenges that you've seen that veterans living in rural areas deal with?
So one of the challenges that we really see are kind of lack of affordable housing stock, especially for people who are of low income. We also find that low income households often don't earn enough to pay for food, clothing, transportation, and a place to call home. So all of those essential needs that people have are very difficult to come by.
Dr. Kaboly talked about transportation, and I'll admit I spent 5 years at VA, but this was illuminating for me in terms of just the transportation network. So even though a veteran is in a rural area, if they have an appointment or any routine appointment at a VA facility, are they able to get transportation to that to the VA facility if they need it?
So Dr. Kaboly is correct. It is very challenging, but we do have the DAV that provides transportation. Here in Nebraska, we have something called VTS, which is Veterans Transportation System, which has opened up access quite a bit, that they drive further than they ever did. And then the other piece is that we have something called rideshare, specific for veterans who are homeless or who are enrolled in our homeless programs, maybe in a permanent supported housing program, where we're able to access Uber and Lyft. But I would say in rural areas, I don't know how many Uber or Lyft drivers you're going to encounter in those locations.
I understand. Can you walk us through a typical engagement with a veteran who's living in a rural area? In other words, you've already mentioned how they might get to you. But what happens when, say, VA can't provide for the services? Because as Dr. Kaboly said, you're not going to have the full range of services in every VA facility. So what happens in that situation?
So in that situation, we look to our community providers. So perhaps a veteran needs a specialty service or some type of medical service that we can't provide locally. We look to what we call care in the community and refer them to more of those local practitioners to provide the support.
All right. Thank you. Jane, your organization, Legal Aid of Nebraska, has what's called a medical legal partnership with the VA Medical Center. Can you explain exactly what a medical legal partnership is and how does it benefit veterans?
So a medical legal partnership is when we have federally qualified health centers, hospitals that are working together with medical and social work, and then also the legal team are working together to provide these wraparound services to help patients with their social determinants of health and helping them with their problems. I think that how that works is that we usually receive referrals directly from the social workers, that the social workers are able to identify if there's a legal need and then send it over to us so that we're able to all work together. The benefit of that is that, as Dr. Foley said, and also Carrie, is access to healthcare, access to stable living, access to you're personally stable within yourself, and access to food and access to income. A lot of people don't understand or may not know that their social needs are actually can be resolved with a legal solution. And so that's why it's so important, and it's so important for all the areas of this, of medical, legal, and also social, to work together. I think someone asked about being funded. And so funding can happen in different ways through medical legal partnerships. They can either be funded directly from the hospitals. For our VA work previously, we've been funded by different grants. We just received a grant recently through the Olson Foundation. Or I think other things are, but it's mostly grants and hospital contracts, but it could just be other funding that may be out there, that there might be personal funding or might be funding directly from different health services. But that is how we are generally funded. And we are one of the very few medical legal partnerships that are independently funded. So we are completely funded by our hospitals or grants.
And so when you talk about funding, I just want to be clear, that funding is for the organization, but the veteran who needs your services, those veterans don't have to pay for those services. Is that right?
That is correct. So we provide free legal services to these veterans because we've received that type of funding.
Excellent. It's not intuitive to me about the correlation between a veteran with a health problem also having that health problem being impacted by legal issues that they may be facing. Can you comment on that for a moment, how that linkage has been made and why it matters?
Sure, it definitely does matter. Like I mentioned before, a lot of the social needs of a patient can be resolved by legal solutions. So let's say, for instance, that if a patient is being evicted, or that a patient is unable to pay their rent, then they have unstable housing. So the legal part can help try to prevent the eviction, while the social side of things are able to try to maybe secure some type of rental assistance. And again, this housing is so important for veterans and for patients, as they need somewhere stable to live so that they can continue improving and continue getting care.
And is it the case that all the veterans that you provide legal services for, are those all provided in person or what?
Sure. So I think that kind of over the pandemic, that has helped with some of the being able to access patients that are in rural areas. In Nebraska, we are quite a bit rural. There we only have a couple of metropolitan cities. So being able to access out in greater Nebraska has been something that we've been able to overcome with using technology, or being able to coordinate with the hospitals so that we can connect with the patient while they're at the facility, as social has provided transportation for them. So it's really just a coordination of trying to connect with the patient and with the veteran, whether they're in the hospital or we may meet them at their home.
Do you use phone or virtual means as well?
Sure. I think anything is on the table. Sometimes you do have to get creative, especially in the rural areas, of trying to connect with people.
So we have not only telemedicine, but telelaw.
Absolutely.
Very good. Nicole, you're in the great state of Maine, and I want to pivot away from medical legal partnerships for a moment. I understand that while Pine Tree Legal does have a medical legal partnership in a VA facility, but you also have partnerships with other community organizations that serve veterans. Can you describe those partnerships for us, or at least a couple of them?
Sure, Will. You're absolutely right. We do have a medical legal partnership with the Maine VA Medical Center here in Maine. However, that medical center is actually quite far. Where Maine is a large geographic state. In fact, 60% of our population is considered rural, living in a rural area. And so accessing that medical center can be really challenging and can create serious barriers to accessing legal services across the state. And so what we hoped to do with our, and I believe have been really successful in doing, is creating partnerships with folks who are on the ground and meet with veterans on a daily basis. One of those partners is Preble Street. They have a veterans housing services. And we have been working with them since 2011, and they do case management. They actually have funding for housing assistance, security deposits and the like. But we've also trained them to issue spot legal service issues or legal issues. And we've also created a direct referral system, an intake system for them specifically, so that we can prioritize those intakes. So we have really been successful in helping with eviction issues, consumer issues, benefits, overpayments, and the like to really help in sustaining and finding suitable and sustaining housing for veterans alike. And so being able to cast that large net and meeting folks where they're at, we think is really important, and those partnerships have really aided in that.
Great. Nicole, I believe I first heard of your organization, Pine Tree Legal, about a dozen years ago when I served on a panel with your former executive director, Nan Hill. And at that time, I believe she was launching a project over which you have oversight now, called stateside-legal.org. Can you talk about and share with our audience exactly what stateside-legal.org is and how does it benefit veterans?
Absolutely, and I'm so thankful that you're allowing me to share this. Stateside Legal was really a Nan Hill's baby, and since her passing, we've really, it really has taken on even a more special meaning. It provides accessibility to information for veterans on a whole slew of legal services issues. We provide connections for resources in the veterans areas. We also provide information on frequently asked questions on child support for veterans, how to fill out forms, a classroom on how to seek disability benefits or an appeal. We also have collaborations on the site as well with like the Veterans Consortium who deals with appeals and who may be able to do direct legal representation for veterans. You know, affordability and accessibility of legal services is challenging for veterans on a good day, but it's even harder for rural vets. And being able to access that online is an extraordinary benefit. And although we don't do direct services on Stateside Legal, we acknowledge and honor their service. And we also empower them to know their rights and their benefits and try to provide the resources and connections that help them enforce those benefits and rights that they've so honorably earned.
Thank you very, very much. I appreciate that. And as I understand it, stateside-legal.org is not only available to veterans, but it's also available to active duty, reservists, guardsmen, the full gamut, anybody with a military connection. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. We're also available to advocates. So, you know, we have folks who may not be as educated or familiar with veterans' rights and how what particular protections veterans may have. And so advocates may come to our site as well to find out that information and better serve their veterans.
I get the impression as I hear about it that this type of format is something that could be of tremendous benefit. I mean, if it were expanded, if there were perhaps others that copied your model, or is that possible, or is Stateside Legal sufficient to handle it all?
I would love to say that, you know, we're able to do it all, Will, but unfortunately, the fact of the matter is that there are needs that, you know, one site or one individual, you know, we're never going to make that difference. But having collaborations and having more folks come together my motto is more is better than not enough. And so, yeah, we can always continue to look to expand. In fact, the Veterans Consortium, we're hoping for a big project moving forward where folks can ask questions about appeals and get general answers on their specific questions. So we're always looking to expand. We're always looking to assist, and we're always looking for collaboration.
Great, thank you. Carrie, I want to return to you for a moment. I understand that one of the programs that you oversee involves veterans who are involved in some way in the criminal justice system. I believe that's the Veterans Justice Outreach Program, or VJL program. Can you describe that, and how does it help veterans who are involved in the criminal justice system?
Sure. So our Veterans Justice Outreach Program here in Nebraska, we have 2 social work staff who engage with justice-involved veterans and help them gain access to VA services at the earliest possible point. So our social workers engage veterans in jail and prisons. We have some very active veterans treatment courts here. And so they work very closely with these individuals to help connect them, like I said, with those VA services to maybe help them address their mental health, their sobriety, and also connect them with housing services. Maybe they need some transitional housing, permanent housing, and our Veterans Justice Outreach social workers are very savvy in connecting veterans with those resources to then hopefully get them somewhere where they, like I said, can address their mental health and substance use, and hopefully engage in positive pro-social behaviors to remain out of a correctional facility.
I've been told that research shows that one of the greatest predictors of homelessness is prior incarceration. So for someone who has served, who may have gotten in trouble with the law, that if they can get reconnected with VA services or get connected originally, either through a veterans treatment court or through some type of reentry program run by the VA, that can be of tremendous help to that veteran as well as to society writ large.
Absolutely.
Dr. Kaboly, for anyone who is interested in helping rural veterans, how do you find the local VA and other community organizations that are working with veterans?
Yeah, so we have about 150 roughly VA medical centers, and for each medical center, there are a group of community-based outpatient clinics that are affiliated with those. Clearly, anybody can come in and volunteer. We have a whole volunteer network for individuals to use their talents in the VA. We have a whole transportation system that depends on both paid and volunteer drivers as another way that we provide service, to get veterans in for care. There's also numerous veteran service organizations, many that you've heard of, like the DFW and the American Legion, that their members are huge assets for us on the healthcare side. And then states. A lot of people don't realize the state. Every state has a Veterans Affairs or office, and there's county level officers that work for veterans. One of the challenges that we sometimes have is not all veterans are either enrolled or eligible for VA healthcare. A lot of people assume that just because you served in the military, you're automatically eligible. And we know that we have roughly 20 million veterans alive right now, and only about 8 million are enrolled. So of the 12 million veterans that are enrolled, only about half of those are eligible to be enrolled. So you have 5 to 6 million veterans. They are veterans, they serve the country, but they're not eligible for VA healthcare. And so there's other ways that we could provide services to them through county veteran services and other organizations.
In your capacity working in the Office of Rural Health, or overseeing that office right now, do you have difficulty from the healthcare side of the house with respect to providing for sufficient healthcare officials in such locations, in rural locations?
Yeah, so, yes and no. The biggest challenge in rural areas with workforce is that there's not a deep bench, meaning that if one person, if you have a small clinic that has one social worker, and that one social worker goes on maternity leave or moves away from the community, there isn't a big pool in that community to find a replacement social worker. You also don't have a lot of people that can, cover other positions. And so the challenge oftentimes in rural areas is that you're fine if you're fully staffed, but the day that you're not, you're now down a large proportion of your workforce. And that creates a problem. So yes, we know that in rural clinics, for example, for physicians, nurse practitioners, PAs, the ones that provide, the care providers, there's a little bit more of a shortage, than in urban areas, but it's everywhere. And the other thing that we can do, and Terry mentioned this, is, we partner with non-VA providers through our Care in the Community program. It's funded through the Mission Act, and we can forget care in the community if it's available. But again, in rural areas, if you need a cardiologist, you're just as likely to be able to get in at the VA sooner and just as close than in the community. So, but we're constantly working with our VA, our non-VA partners to get patients care.
Thank you. I have a final question for you panelists that I'd like everyone to respond to. And if audience members could take just one thing away from this panel, what should it be? And I'd like to start with you, Jane.
Sure. So I think one thing to take away is that how important it is that each partner, medical, social, legal, all really intertwine with each other. And it's important that we all educate each other to provide these wraparound services to improve the health and the lives of these veterans.
Thank you. Carrie, how about you? What one thing would you like audience members to take away?
I think it's kind of similar to what Jane said. It's really that collaboration and connection. The two entities working together to provide the best care and service to the veteran to enhance their life.
Great. Thank you. Nicole?
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but casting that large net and meeting veterans where they're at, I think is really crucial. And having those collaborations and partners is essential to being able to do that.
Thank you very much. Dr. Kaboli.
I'm going to cheat a little bit and say two things because they're related. And that is, one, like I said, rural is not monolithic. There's just not one rural in the United States. It's very heterogeneous. I think we need to think about that when we talk about solutions. And then the other big thing is access. And what are the ways that we can overcome access barriers to care that rural veterans have? It's kind of like access barriers for legal services. What are the ways that we can work together to overcome these?
Okay. I understand that we have some questions here, and let me see, and there's a comment on a question. Comment is, research has shown that veterans who receive legal advice and assistance with their problems have improved mental health outcomes, even if they lose their legal battle. What do the panelists think of this finding? Nicole?
Sure. I think, we as legal providers do a wonderful service in ensuring and enshrining folks' rights. But I think the most important thing that I've found anyway, as a direct legal services provider, is that people want to be heard. They want to hear. They want to hear that people are listening and see by action that people are listening. And so even if they're not successful in their case, having an individual hear them, respond to them, make efforts to assist them, I think goes a very long way. And I've seen that anecdotally, and so I'm not surprised at the research that's been out that affirms that and confirms that.
Thank you very much. Did anyone else like to respond to that? Actually someone sent a specific question for you, Nicole. Although Illinois isn't rural, are any of the stateside legal programs accessible for Illinoisans?
Absolutely. So Stateside Legal is a website that really targets to a lot of federal law, but we also have a list of organizations where folks can reach out to specifically. So it answers a lot of questions on federal law, but it also does, I would say, some on the state level. It's a little hard to maintain 50 states at a time, making sure that we're up to date on all of that. But absolutely, any of the information that is regarding veterans benefits or any federal rights that they have is available. And as far as partnerships and things that we have going on at Stateside, we would love to have more partners nationally to provide that information and to help so that, you know, veterans all over the country, and quite frankly out of the country, we have a lot of users who come who are out of the continental United States looking for information as well. And so we always welcome that collaboration. And as far as our other collaboration outside of Stateside Legal, you know, if you have any organizations that do housing specifically, or have veterans organizations in Illinois, which actually I know you do, Illinois is actually really great for that. Reaching out and collaborating with them, we have found it here in Maine to be really successful, and I have no reason to think that it wouldn't be successful in Illinois as well. So good luck, and if you have any interest, we would love to connect as well.
Thank you. Jane, we have a question that has come in that says sometimes disabled veterans are above our normal income requirements for organizations that are funded by Legal Services Corporation. What do we do in those situations? Do you have any suggestions on how we can match such a veteran with who may be still low income, but just above our limits?
I think that's the important part about veteran work, is that we have the very low income, and then these kind of blue collar workers, the veterans that kind of sit just right above that federal poverty line. And for our medical legal partnership specifically, we are not income based, we are patient based. And that is because we're able to be funded completely under our hospital contracts and our grants. So I think that that might be something to work towards, or you know, trying to find funding that opens up that gap a little bit more. But that is such a wide range of patients that are right above that federal guideline that really do need assistance.
Great. Well, thank you very, very much. And I'm not sure if we have any more questions that have come in. Let's see. Perhaps there is one. Many legal aid, it says many legal aid programs only assist custodial parents with family law matters, but veterans who are single fathers have enormous needs in the area of family law. Do the panelists anticipate any changes in this area?
I guess I can speak to that. So we are patient based. So whether you are the custodial parent or whether you are not, it's based upon merit of your case as well, and what's reasonable and what's realistic. And I think it's important for the legal provider to provide a realistic outcome to each person and as to their case. And again, I think this goes back to that previous question on being able to be heard and being validated, and that goes a lot with family law matters. But that generally is not our case. I can't speak to any of the other legal aids, but we focus on the patient themselves.
Thank you so very much. And I want to thank all of our panelists for sharing their time, passion, and just everything that you do on behalf of veterans. I will say that I spent 5 years in the Department of Veterans Affairs, and there were times that I heard a lot of public criticism of VA employees and public servants. None of that matched what I saw and just what I see from the dedication of you all, Dr. Kabole and Carrie, and all of the people that you represent in your local areas as well as all across the country. And I definitely want to express my appreciation to you and to the Department of Veterans Affairs. Likewise, Nicole and to Jane, with Legal Aid of Nebraska and Pine Tree Legal Assistance. We just greatly appreciate all that you do, and on behalf of veterans and all the clients that you serve. We greatly appreciate it. Now, I'm going to turn the floor over to Nick Hassenfuss. Nick is going to provide some closing remarks. He's a Marine Corps veteran and associate attorney with the law firm Holland and Knight in Boston, where he also serves as the pro bono chair of the Veterans Legal Group. Nick was a key member of LSC's Veterans Task Force, and he continues to work with us as we implement the task force recommendations that John Malcolm talked about earlier in the program. He's also a member of LSC's Emerging Leaders Council. Nick, over to you.
Appreciate the introduction, Will. Before I get into my spiel here, I want to say a bunch of thank yous. First, thanks to LSC for putting together this terrific, informative Veterans Day event focusing on initiatives to support rural veterans. LSC Chairman John Levy and LSC Board Member John Malcolm, thank you so much for your remarks. And dang, what a great panel. Thank you, LSC General Counsel Will Gunn, for moderating, and the terrific work and insights from all our panelists, Nicole, Dr. Kabole, and Jane. A very special thank you to Senator Dan Sullivan for his introductory comments, and to any other members of Congress that may be viewing this event. Last, but certainly not least, thank you to the LSC folks that are leading these initiatives and coordinating this event. In particular, Stephanie Davis, Caitlin Brown, Trent Davis, and Rebecca Cohen. We appreciate you. Wow, that was a lot, all very important. So as most of you are likely aware, November is also Native American History Month. You're probably familiar with the legacy of the Navajo Nation Code Talker Marines that use their indigenous language to play an extremely pivotal and important role in winning World War II, a code that was never broken by the enemy. What you might not be aware of is that Native Americans serve in the military at a higher percentage than any other ethnic group. A reported 25% of all able-bodied Native Americans enlist in the military. A majority of these Native American service members return to their reservations, which are frequently in rural areas. It's not unheard of for half the population of a given Native American community to be military veterans, as such military service has been culturally important for many tribes going back centuries. Compare that 25% to the nation's total veteran population of 6.4%, as reported in 2021 by US World News. Notwithstanding the extremely high percentage of Native American veterans, Native Americans were facing barriers to establish tribal veterans service officers, or tribal VSOs. If you're not familiar with VSOs, they provide assistance to veterans submitting claims for VA benefits. Some of the larger ones you likely have heard of are the American Legion, Disabled American Veterans, Paralyzed Veterans of America, large organizations like that. Although the VA created special regulations to establish tribal VSOs, no tribes were able to meet the requirements, even though some had applied multiple times. The issue was brought to the attention of the American Bar Association's Standing Committee on Legal Assistance for Military Personnel. We call them LAMP for short because their name's a little long. After being briefed on the issue, LAMP drafted and the ABA adopted a resolution at the 2020 ABA annual meeting urging the VA to eliminate obstacles preventing tribes from receiving accreditation from the VA. Shortly after the ABA resolution was passed, the VA established a new tribal representative expansion project in 2021. So far, the Navajo Nation now qualifies as a tribal VSO with accreditation, and the VA staff continues to have meetings with tribes to pursue discretionary authorization. In addition, for tribes who do not have adequate representation, the VA is now seeking to facilitate access to representation through existing means or by using its general counsel's discretionary authority to authorize individuals affiliated with tribal governments. Speaking of the VA, each year the VA identifies the top unmet needs of veterans facing housing insecurity. Nearly every one of those unmet needs is legal in nature, but most veterans who cannot afford legal assistance end up falling into the justice gap. As John Malcolm mentioned earlier, several individuals from LSC's Veterans Task Force have been working on implementing the recommendations from the Veterans Task Force report. The individuals on the implementation committee, along with partners from the United Way, Mission United, Legal Aid of Broward County, the Florida Department of Veterans Affairs, and Nova Southeastern, provided pro bono legal services in conjunction with a veterans stand down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. This successful pilot program helped provide legal aid to nearly 30 veterans in a single day. The implementation committee is working on a version 2.0 of the pilot that will be held in a rural area, so the committee can help focus on those issues. The committee will then develop a toolkit to assist other organizations with providing pro bono legal aid services at this type of event. So what's the key takeaway from everything I said here today? If we get involved with pro bono legal aid, we can make a difference. A low income or residing in a rural area should not be a barrier to a quality life. So I'm asking, pleading, and challenging you, if you're not already, find a military or veteran pro bono opportunity to volunteer with. If you need help finding one in your area, please feel free to contact LSC or certainly the members here that have been talking, and we'll help you find one. Remember this, you do not need to be a veteran to volunteer with a veterans organization. Like all other good causes, this relies on the advocacy of allies and champions. If you're unsure what types of opportunities are available, please take a look at the Law 360 article that Anna Richardson, the co-executive director of Veterans Legal Services in Massachusetts, and I recently published that discusses military and veteran pro bono opportunities. Thanks for attending LSC's annual Veterans Day program. I can't wait to hear about all the great work related to military and veterans that you did next year.
Thank you so much, Nick. That concludes our program for the afternoon. Please join me in a virtual round of applause for everyone who graced us with their remarks and presence today. And I would encourage everyone who has a colleague that would benefit from hearing today's webinar to direct them to LSC's YouTube channel, which we will post in the chat, where you will soon be able to find a recording of today's program. Again, thank you all so much, and thank you everyone on the line who is a veteran or a current member of the Armed Forces for your service. And I wish you all a wonderful rest of the day and a happy Thanksgiving if that is your tradition. Take care. Thanks.